Magick.me is the world's greatest school for magic, meditation, and mysticism. You can learn everything there, from chaos magic to hermeticism to meditation to how to supercharge your finances and take absolute control of your destiny. In short, you get all of the tools you need to turn chaos into beautiful, scintillating order and master your life. It's incredible. You've probably heard me talk about it on the show quite a lot. But check it out. It's growing fast. And I just want to say, if you're confused about where to start, because I have so many courses there, the Adept Initiative is the place to go. The Adept Initiative is the flagship course on magick.me, and it contains everything you need to know to master the most profound ancient techniques of changing your consciousness and the most modern and cutting-edge tools and systems for absolutely turning your life into a masterpiece. You are really going to dig it. Go check it out, and I will see you in class. It's magick.me, magick.me. Well, thank you so much for agreeing to do it. It's really good to see you, and I'm very honored always to talk to you. Thank you so much.
I'm honored. I've
on.
got your main book up here. I keep it near me at all times.
Thank you. Well, I have your book here.
Oh, yeah.
This is
good.
I love this. It is, and
Thank you.
when I say I love it, I mean it was profoundly sad, embarrassing, and also hilarious. And I feel like this is a monument to the kind of epically cringe hubris of the Patagonia class. But even more cringe, I saw myself in it in terms of my own. Well, I think everyone's one of the things we can get into this, but the mindset, how much it's infected everyone with their isolationism. And I certainly live in my own bubble, so.
Yeah. I mean, that was really what led me to write it was less my experience with the tech bros, because that thing happened. My billionaire bunker experience was in 2018. It was during the COVID crisis when I saw everybody bunkering in one way or another around me, and then realizing that this was just the fulfillment of kind of Amazon's dream of video doorbell, absolute, whatever that is, self-sovereign, isolated surveillance capitalism. Like, oh my, we're all succumbing to it.
Yeah, it's so funny because I remember, I think a couple of years before COVID and before she died, Jen pointed out, was observing people getting packages from Amazon Prime, and in Jen fashion said, oh, they're training people to never leave the house.
Mm-hmm. Right. And they are. I mean, Jen was right about pretty much everything. The whole trick was, that what people couldn't get, they would listen to Jen or even to William Burroughs before Jen and think that they were paranoid about a specific thing, like, oh, the Queen is doing this or the president's doing that. It's like, no, it was more, it was almost like a form of, institutional understanding that the environment is being tuned to do these things, not some specific idiot at Amazon. I mean, maybe there is a specific idiot at Amazon who's got the idea, but they're more responding to the atmospheric agenda than they are, particularly powerful, evil people.
Yeah, it's like the control is controlled by its need to control thing. It's just control. Well,
right. Where is control? We never find it, right?
Right.
Control. Or that what was that Scanner Darkly when the guy finds out he's the cop?
Yeah. I love that. Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's something that's missing from people's finger pointing, I think. That's well, maybe we should start off at the beginning. I think so. Your article that generated this book is, for me, the most important article of the last 5 years. And I think about it all the time, and I'm going to think about it more that I've read the book. So maybe we should start there for people who don't know kind of the setup.
Sure. Well, so I'm this, technology writer, and, did all these books on media, technology, and society. And usually they're kind of laughed off when they come out. And then like 10 years later, when they come true, people are like, oh, this guy's not an idiot after all. And so it's happened enough that now occasionally kind of wealthy tech conferences will invite me to come, usually in the role of a kind of an intellectual dominatrix to, I'm sure they have regular dominatrices when they're home, but, to kind of, beat them into intellectual submission, tell them the error of their ways and how they've succumbed to corporate capitalism. And they're like, oh, thank you, sir. May I have another? And I go on my way, as if spending, being able to tolerate my ridicule for an hour somehow purges them of their guilt for all the AIs that they're sticking in our toasters or whatever. And the enslaved children they're sending for the cobalt in the mines, all that stuff that they know that they're doing. And this I thought was one of those. But, and I haven't actually shared what it really, really, really was. What it really, really, really was a hedge fund. It was either a hedge fund or it might have been a hedge fund service company, like some kind of financial company that like services hedge funds or does whatever hedge funds needs, like, trades their stocks or something. And they invited like 100 of their wealthiest clients out to this thing in the desert, which was not a James Bond secret meeting about the apocalypse so much as the way that they vacation with each other. And there was like a menu of events. I only found this out later. It's like a menu of events. So it's like, do you want to meet a celebrity chef and learn how to make eggs Benedict, with this food TV guy? Do you want to improve your golf swing for the hour with this? Or do you want to go hear Rushkoff talk about the digital economy? Right. So there were these different kind of things like, learn guitar picking from Kenny Loggins, right? Learn, souffles from Emerald, learn the how to stop your hook from Jack Nicholas.
Sounds like a real life masterclass.
Yeah, exactly. Like real life masterclass experiences with people or me. So I'm sitting in the green room thinking that they're about to take me on stage to do a talk. Right. And I'm practicing my little, Marxist screed. And the guy comes in and, I think it's the guy with the lavalier mic, that they clip on you and then take you out. But it's like 4 other guys follow him. So it's just these 4, 50 something wealthy dudes, Patagonia dudes who are 4, and I looked them up later. 4 of them were billionaires and one of them was close enough, in the 100 centimillionaire, I guess. And they didn't want to hear my talk at all. They just wanted to do like this sort of Q&A. And it started out being a Q&A about what they should invest in, like, Bitcoin or Ethereum, virtual reality or augmented reality. And I'm so not the one to ask that. I'm the guy who would have said Betamax, right? Not VHS, because Betamax is a better format. I would have said CompuServe, not AOL, because CompuServe was text only and it wasn't bothering with all that crappy internet. So don't ask me. I know what's going to happen in the big sense, but I never know red or black. I don't know. It's going to be either red or black. It's going to be a big deal. It's like all I can tell you. So bet on both, I guess, if you're going to be on Team Rushkoff. So they're asking me all those, and then finally they get around to Alaska or New Zealand, right? And so I realized what they're doing. They want to know, and that's what they stayed on the rest of the hour was all of these questions about their bunkers and survival and uploading their consciousness. But it was mainly about their bunkers. And one of them had these plans for his underground bunker that was going to be these sort of shipping containers buried under the ground and this thing and that. And he had like a heated jacuzzi in there. And I'm like, dude, and this is just all I do. This is my life. I tweak these people. I'm like, dude, the guy next door to me has a heated pool. And, he said all summer there's like vans in front of there bringing him new parts. Like, where are you going to get new heaters and filters and all for your heated jacuzzi pool after the apocalypse? And the guy just like opens his Moleskine book and he's like, get parts for a heated pool. Like they're really not thinking in advance at all. So I started asking them about how do they defend their compounds from the likes of us when we don't have food and the climate refugees and all. And they're like, oh, well, We got Navy SEALs coming in. It's never Army Rangers. It's Navy SEALs, right? I'm an Army Ranger kind of guy. On land, right? But they are Navy SEALs who are coming. They've got, their helicopters are on standby and gassed up at all times. You just push a button. The guys are going to either pick you up or meet you there. And that's going to. So then I started to tweak them with that. Say, okay, so you got your Navy SEALs on your bunker island. How do you pay them after your money's worthless? They're like, huh? Like, dude, this is the end of the world, right? The electromagnetic pulses come or whatever, the climate disaster, your dollars aren't worthless, your cryptos are worthless, everything's worthless. So then they start brainstorming these ideas like, oh, well, what if I'm the only one who knows the combination to the safe where the food is kept? Like, oh, Navy SEALs don't have any experience getting information out of people. I was like, you're going to spend the apocalypse being constantly waterboarded, right? Until you give them every piece of it. That sounds like fun, Or then one of them said, we're going to have these implants that are going to control who can get into what room. So they'll have an implant, and then maybe we could also have it, electrocute, like shock the people if they start not behaving or doing the wrong. And it was bizarre, right? So for me, it was like, okay, here are the wealthiest, most powerful people I've ever been in the same room with in my life, yet they feel utterly incapable of influencing the future. That the best they can do is see the future as this sort of immovable disaster that they can plan for or maybe mitigate, but they can't do anything about it. And that's what set me off on this whole journey to look at, how have we gotten to the place where the job of the wealthy is to earn enough money to insulate themselves from the damage they're creating by earning money in that way. This problem with colonization that you just keep externalizing pain and torment. And then it's Thomas Jefferson's the way he talked about slavery. He said it's like having a wolf by the ears, right? You can't let go of it because it'll jump you. So that's their approach to reality. And it's just the sad, unimaginative, I was just so disappointed. And then, I wrote this article that then caught fire because people went, oh my God, these guys really do just want to get away from the rest of us.
Yeah. I love the Shotcallers thing. That was so disturbing. I think there were a lot of reasons the article just was burned into my mind for the last several years. But one of them is it's the only time I can think of where, it's like that article was like getting a peek behind the curtain. And it's not because you have the privilege of access. You can access, you in this situation got access to these people. And it's like not these people controlling the world. It's people worrying about, they can't throw money at a problem. And it's, at once I felt it was, kind of humanizing, but also it's disturbing that, it's like, oh, even the people in control have truly are not in control and have no ability to, and they're also terrified. So
right, they are terrified, and the ones who are the least terrified really are the ones who have given up on humanity. The ones who believe, like Musk or McCaskill, or all these folks with a effective altruism. Sam Bankman-Fried was one of them,
yep.
Or probably still is. The idea that human beings now are in the larval stage, that we're like the maggots on the original home planet. And we're only important insofar as we spawn our winged, digital successors. That will be. But believe me, it's the things going to Mars and throughout the universe. That's not us. That's our AI counterparts that get sent there. The robot futures, the place where Sam Altman uploads his consciousness. He's the guy behind OpenAI who like Kurzweil, wants to upload himself to the computer before he dies and live on in that way. That's who goes in the spaceships. And that's such a, and that's what I write about in the book, obviously, is the way that this goes all the way back to Francis Bacon and the beginning of empirical science and this, distrust of women and nature. Francis Bacon's famous quote, that science will let us take nature by the forelock and hold her down and submit her to our will. Right?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about that because obviously that will be, because you kind of mentioned the context, it's very surprisingly, the context of the oppression of women and witchcraft. I think that would, of course, be interesting to people who listen to this podcast. that you kind of took it all the way back to Enlightenment, Renaissance thinking, and the birth of science and the oppression of magic.
Right. Right, which is what it is. I mean, because the interesting thing about digital is digital makes everything explicit, right? It becomes explicit code. And it's such an interesting thing to compare code and incantation, right? Incantation is well, as you know, as a practicing magician, a practicing mage.
Wow, that's level 27, right?
Yeah, well, you incant openly. There's as much give as take in appropriately executed magic, right? If you're like, I'm going to do magic to get that woman in bed. No. Don't do it like that. That's code, right? That's code. I'm going to get that one how I want it. It's like, if you're doing magic, you're going to bring Eros. I want to open to Eros, and I'm going to do a bunch of... It's going to be pretty friggin' open-ended, and it has to be if you're going to start playing with those powers. But technology and code, as opposed to magic, is closed. It's about narrowing the possibilities, which is why when you see the winners of that game, the tech billionaires, they're not open-minded. They're closed-minded, end of the world, apocalypse, survivalist, zero-sum game. There's a paucity of imagination. And, of course, an inability to make connection with other people, to make eye contact, to do any of the things that you would think that genuine empowerment would engender.
That's really interesting. I was thinking as you mentioned that, it's like magic, when it's done best, is open-ended and therefore involves a lot of trust. You're kind of putting it out there and trusting that the universe knows better than you. I mean, it's very much biblical as well. It's like, not by my will, but by thine let it be done. In the sense that there is a benevolent higher intelligence that knows, is almost parental, that knows what you need better than you do. Or, you could even make it like the Rolling Stones thing. You don't always get what you want, but you get what you need. I mean, that's what you want. But what you're, the code metaphor is like, that's much more like dealing with a demon, where you need everything in a contract because it's going to mess everything up. It can. Right. You do have to deal with it. They make you sign, right? Yeah. You're going to sell your soul. You got to sign in blood. There's no trust, right?
Yeah, which is really interesting. It's not, I mean, even a covenant with God, even a biblical covenant is kind of open. I mean, God got pretty specific with Abraham. I'm going to give you this and your kids are there. You get back this land. And I mean, it's like, I think people took God too literally in those phrases. I think you could do the same open-ended thing with it. But you're exactly right. And that's the way, when they do unleash algorithms, I mean, think about it from a magical sensibility. I'm going to create an entity that's going to identify the psychological, emotional, and spiritual weaknesses in other people and exploit them in order to get them to do things that are against their best interests. I mean, we're basically programming demons and unleashing them out into the
absolutely.
Internet.
And people are putting their own consciousness in it. And I think that, I explicitly see it that way. I really do. It's the zero trust model, which is held up as such an ideal, like with crypto and things like that. You want zero trust systems.
Oh, we've replaced. There's no need for human trust at all in this system. None at all. It's like, well, shoot. Well, then there's no need for humans either. Then is there? Why don't you just run your blockchain and we could all die? I mean, the object of the game is not to substitute for trust, but to engender trust. And have fun. We could, but they're always,
which is the basis of economic exchange. Which is always
you would
missed.
think.
Yeah.
You would think, but now I'm starting to understand economics as a last resort. You go to the ledger, you go to the scorecard, you go to the instant replay when the social fabric has torn, when it hasn't worked out right, then we'll go look at the numbers. But it's like, if you're living in an appropriate society, everyone's nice. Do you need food? Here's some food. It's like we all say, it all comes out in the wash. I would never worry about how many hours have you done on my podcast versus my hours on yours, and is it equal? Come on, this is everything every point of contact we have is good for both of us. And if we can't see it that way, we're lost.
That's really interesting to talk about that I mean, I was going to say this for later, but we might as well get straight into the magical thinking. It's interesting to think about that in terms of the way that I think about it, the higher trust in just, I don't even, not leaving out the word magic. It's like your relationship with the universe, your relationship with life. The higher trust it is, like we're talking about, trusting in a higher benevolent intelligence that knows better than you, whether that's magic or religion or faith or just whatever it is. Like that's kind of what you want. And the less trust you have, the more demonic it gets. And it's the same with relationships. Or even of any type with other people, where the more transactional it becomes, the more demonic it is, and like the more you're getting into trouble, and that's like, it's like with friends who are like keeping or in a relationship, people, keeping score in a relationship or, becomes very antisocial.
Right. And
destructive.
Those things are appropriate maybe in prison camps, where there's like very little stuff, right? There's only going to be like one egg for 30 dudes. And how are we going to make sure it's like, and that's why it's funny, all those, the game theory that they use to sort of say how human behavior works, so they'll use like the prisoner's dilemma, the prisoner, okay, so if you confess, then you get this many years, but if you don't confess, then he'll get that many and all that. And people, they think that people will do the selfish thing. It's like, wait a minute. But the underlying premise is that we are prisoners being interrogated in a war. It's like, wait a minute, that's a very, to me, I don't know, just me, but that's a very particular circumstance, right?
That's funny. That reminds me, one of I'm sure you know Ralph Abraham, the chaos man.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I've had him on the podcast a couple times, and one of the things he said to me that is one of the most hopeful things I've ever heard is he said when they were first doing chaos math, there was all this interest from corporations and government and funding. And that's why it was so trendy in the 80s, because they thought they could use it to do predictive modeling on the stock market or human behavior. And then they realized the outcome was they mathematically discovered that it is literally impossible to predict anything from data. And so they killed chaos mathematics and buried that. They're like, no, too many salaries are writing on this. But that for me was so encouraging. It's like, yes, human beings are not predictable through any model.
Right. I know. It's funny because I've talked to those guys. I mean, I knew Ralph really well in the really late 80s when I was first starting out and before I wrote Siberia and was interested in the nexus between, his stuff, Chaos, Gaia, Eros, and psychedelics, digital technology, fantasy role-playing, cultural change, all those things were coming together. He was friends with Rupert Sheldrake and Terence McKenna. It was all, those were the trialogues of our time. And I became really interested in what they called stochastics, which is the application of fractals and to the stock market, and researched and went deeper and deeper and deeper, and finally found the guy at Credit Suisse, or Suisse, I guess, who was in charge of stochastics, and went out for lunch with him, and then finally he admits, oh, it's a really good way of showing the order between what happened. But it's utterly useless in telling people what's going to happen. It's like all stochastics proves is that you'll be able to see the pattern after it.
Afterwards, yeah, in hindsight, yeah.
It's like, okay.
Which you could already do, without math, right. Yeah.
So it's wonderful. It's like you could paint a very pretty picture. You could tell a very pretty story about what has just happened. But it doesn't really arm you for the future, except to understand deep down that you really don't know, and that should be freeing, right? If you really, really don't know, it should be liberating. But that was the other core insight of my billionaires meeting was the internet that I came up with, with Timothy Leary and Jaron Lanier and Are You Serious and William Gibson was about unleashing the kind of unbridled potential of the collective human imagination. That the internet was going to create wobble. It was going to turn this read-only media universe in which we were living through television, into a read-write universe, and unpredictability and novelty would come forward. These guys, investors, when they see that, they don't want novelty. They want predictability. They want, because they're making a bet and they want the highest probability that that bet is going to come true. So instead of giving us technology to make wild, unpredictable things happen, they turn technology on us to make us more predictable. And that is the digital world that we're living in, one where technology is used on human beings to make human beings act more like machines. And AI is just the latest, generation of such technologies, maybe the most powerful one, because people are more and more willing to let AI behave for them, to do the things for them, but they're not doing it. That's all an AI does. All AI writing is what's the most predictable next word? What's the most predictable probable next sentence? And we are going to, if we surrender to probability, everything narrows down to nothing, Talk about will, the will goes away in a world of absolute probability.
As you're saying that, I'm wondering if that's a big reason why so much of pop culture just seems to be repetitions of previous things and remakes of previous things at this point, because they're betting on things that did well in the past.
Yeah, it's all yeah, it is. And everything, because even when you try to pitch like a new kind of TV show, it's like, okay, MASH meets Orphan Black, whatever, and then they're happy. Okay, as long as you can combine two existing things from the rearview mirror.
And those did well financially in the numbers,
Yeah, because it's, their Netflix algorithm tells the executives what to look for, and then it's about who's coming in with, obvious, it was that was how House of Cards happened. It was like Kevin Spacey, David Fincher, politics. The algorithm spit that out.
Yeah, you make the interesting point towards the end of this book where you're saying, even these, hedge fund billionaires like Ray Dalio and people like that, they're not making their own decisions. The algorithms are thinking for them.
For the most part, yeah. And it's because you look at Ray Dalio or any of those guys, or Fink, the guy that runs BlackRock, they come out with these letters. They write one like every year or two. Our hedge fund, our venture fund is now committed to the, fostering the human potential, and we're going to turn a new leaf and sustainable this and that. And they're just doing the same thing every time. They're doing whatever the algorithm told them to in terms of their bets. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, that book that Ray Dalio put out, the Principles one, is all about how to get algorithms to think for you explicitly. Like, that's his entire philosophy.
Yeah, exactly. It's this Tim Ferriss kind of future, or these guys. Who was that book? The book about how to fake things, where you're supposed to like go find a bookstore in Cambridge and then put on your resume that you spoke at Harvard. It's like
that's apparently what's that guy's name that people are watching now? That podcaster, the really milquetoast one. What's this guy's name? He's the one that he's the one that claims he's an MIT research scientist, but he never went.
Right. There are these guys, right?
Yeah.
And then they write books on how to do that.
He just had a library card or something like that. I can't remember his name, but he's really popular right now.
There's a bunch of them is the sad thing. I almost prefer a Gary Vaynerchuk or somebody.
Lex Friedman, that's the one.
Oh, God. No, it's nuts. And then, and then people aspire to that. But that's sort of the Trumpism thing, think it, be it, get it, it's the dark side of Norman Vincent Peale and magical thinking. It's theosophy, theosophy as capitalism.
That's so funny. Yeah, I think that's the crux of what I want to talk about with you, and that is just, I wanted to talk to you about the magical thinking of tech bros compared to quote unquote R. It's not really R, but R magic, right? It's like so much of this book we're talking about, and my experience of tech bros, just like there's this level of like sociopathy where they're like, I had a vision at Burning Man on mushrooms and I have to save the world on the blockchain.
Right.
and people having mystic visions. And I know so many people like this. They're like, the blockchain spoke to me on mushrooms, and I must go out and bring everyone together. And there is a certain level of magical thinking and delusion required to be an entrepreneur. And it's so bizarre, like whether you're just mentioning this kind of theosophy as capitalism or some of the things you touched on earlier. I think the thing about leaving the planet as human beings being larval, that's a very that's like Burroughs had that idea.
Yeah.
Grant Morrison had that idea. So there's like this bizarre, I don't know what to call it. Is it is it the reverse side, or is it just kind of this mimetic drift? Have all these people, I don't think these people have necessarily grown up reading the same things, but they probably read or watched things that have been influenced by things that have been influenced by other things. But that, for me, the kind of like magical thinking nexus of kind of, or perhaps as you would put it, where it kind of intersects with the mindset, is really interesting and really critical because, I have often been surrounded by people like this. They never invite me to their parties and they never pay me anything. But, it's like, I know a lot of people like this,
You got to get the money, man.
Yeah.
You could easily play it with magic and shit. They would eat that up, right?
Well, any tips appreciated, but yeah, I'm a little afraid to, though, just because like, I don't know what I'm unleashing there, but yeah.
Right. We should send out to do that is Mitch Horowitz. We should make him, because he's got good enough psychic armor. He could go in there and do it, and he could come back and tell us whether it's safe to try.
Yeah.
He's got an adventurous put on that leather jacket and go.
Well, I have done some of it. I mean, I worked with Google on their AI thing a little bit.
Right.
Yeah.
I know. So
but
you might be infected already.
I am for sure. Yeah, I
am. No, but these guys are not. It's not. I mean, magical thinking and magical practice are kind of two.
It's only to build antibodies, though. Just to copy.
Yes, to increase for all of us.
Yes.
Right. Then we'll draw your blood and make a vaccine.
Yeah, please do.
For all of us.
But then you'll be infected with me. So.
I mean, it's a bit like acid. You put a tech bro on acid and you get a tech bro on acid, right? That's their set and setting. If their set and setting is control and self-sovereignty and money, then they're going to come back with that. So yeah, I mean, I was working on a play. I still want to do it about 5 tech bros who go to do ayahuasca down in South America, and they have the vision and want to save the world and all that. And
that
then
would be hilarious. Please do that. Please do that. That's
you see them on their G5
setup.
On the way back, just rationalizing that the social networks and evil algorithmic stuff they do is the way to save the world. That is the expression of Gaia. So I think they're going to have to throw one of them off the plane. One of them who stays enlightened, they're going to have to kill him before they get back. Maybe they just chuck him out. But it's it's funny. It's almost more fun to talk about the play than actually to do it, because sitting and watching a play takes like 2 hours, where we can kind of get the punchline in 2 minutes. But these guys, so on acid, they do have, and I wrote about them. They go to Burning Man. It was like I was calling that chapter. A funny thing happened on the way back from the playa, right? They have the playa experience, and then they think, because they think of themselves as masters of the universe, tech bros, it's like, okay, I understand ecosystems. Now I'm going to build eco villages. I'm going to clear cut 5 miles of old growth forest in the Netherlands or somewhere and build my sustainable solar panel, sort of nothing against them, but my sort of game B paradise, meta modern facility. And I'm going to have a software stack for education, a software stack for spirituality. I'm going to have a blockchain thing for this, and cocoa trees and this and that, and use indigenous wisdoms on this stack. And it's like, dudes, it's like Neom is sort of the ultimate one of those, this city that they want to build in Saudi Arabia. So it's a multi-billion-dollar project. There's multi-billion dollars already in it. And it's partly the Saudi Arabian government, partly other sovereign wealth funds, a bunch of billionaires. And they hired, the former head of one of the big studios, like 10 major regenerative architects, all these people to build a city. It's like 100 miles long and 1 or 2 miles wide. It's a long thing in this little zone that some climatologists have said is going to be a mild temperate zone inside Saudi Arabian desert. And so they're going to build this giant thing with all this fractal architecture and solar panels and education and water things and self-generating blah, blah. The only problem is it turns out that in order to build this completely sustainable futuristic eco city, they've got to move these like 5,000 or 10,000 Bedouins who've been living sustainably on this land for like 5,000 years.
It's like the more things change, the more they stay the same.
So we got to get rid of these ones. And so we can, but it's always colonization, right? It's always how are we going to, they don't want to see it. But again, so that is, tech bros on magic. We're going to think it. We're going to imagine it. Their way they imagine is through an almost Sim City-like building ex nihilo. So any place that they imagine settling is like empty. It's like this state. That's why I say ex nihilo. It's like there's nothing there, as if you can just go and not acknowledge that this is a story that's already in motion. There is no new beginning. You can't reboot. That's what they want to do. Let's reboot civilization. Go from game A to game B.
Well, that was the colonization of North America.
Right. There's nobody there. And that's back to Hobbes, who said you don't have to act like there's any living people there. Those people who are there, they're just like animals. You could treat them like shrubs because they're not saved Christians. They're not individualized post-Enlightenment humans. They're just blah. So just go kill them, which is what we did and where we still see it. Any of these folks are, and now us. And that's why we're waking up. The tech bros see us like the colonizers saw the natives. I was just writing this, like if you want to think of social media as the missionaries, artificial intelligence are the conquistadors, right? The missionaries come, engender us to the tech, get us speaking that language, do all the intelligence gathering, and then pass all that to the AIs who come to actually conquer the species.
Interesting and disturbing. In that light, one thing I wanted to talk about is, you refer to this as this kind of colonizer. You refer to this as the mindset. So it's colonizer mindset, fear mindset, bubble mindset. But the thing that I kept thinking about throughout the book was not so much the billionaires, but the rest of us. How much have we been infected by this mindset? And particularly in the last couple of years, just the extent to which people have been taught to be afraid of each other. Whether it was the pandemic, don't get 6 feet from somebody, other people are all disease vectors, or, anything you say, everyone will cancel you, or, and you actually talk about in this book, the classic, experience of, which I'm very sorry about, by the way, that you're getting mugged in Park Slope, which usually makes people much more afraid of people. But it seems like that, I don't want to go so far as to say this is a planned thing, but it's like maybe it's just more of an infection, but a top-down, trickle-down infection of the mindset where certainly the middle class, and that's kind of what I was saying at the beginning of the podcast, where I was seeing my own isolating and bubbling tendencies, which we've all been trained and encouraged to do during the pandemic. Now we're all kind of acting in the same way, or maybe, hopefully not, but certainly a lot of people are, where it's just this kind of increasing bunker fear mentality. And I wonder how much of that is playing into the control system.
Well, in part, the technologies we use engender this psychology, if nothing else. We don't, this is what I was writing about back in my book, Team Human. We have almost disabled the painstakingly evolved mechanisms for establishing rapport and social cohesion. So I can see your head nodding now as I'm talking, but that's really the only feedback I'm getting. I can't see if your pupils are getting larger or smaller. I can't tell if our breathing rates are syncing up. So partly what happens, you say you agree with me, but my body doesn't have the cues it needs to know that that's true. So my body assumes it's not true. So the more you say you agree with me in social media, the more suspicious I get. My norepinephrine comes up, or my cortisol rather than my oxytocin. So my mirror neurons don't fire. The oxytocin doesn't go through my bloodstream. We don't bond in that way. So the technologies themselves engender the suspicion and the paranoia and the isolation. And then they use that low-level constant state of fear, panic, suspicion to sell us more stuff that encourages it. So you get the Amazon doorbell with the video on it and the little messages, so it just sort of automagically comes. We buy technologies that are sold to us as replacing human labor, but actually just camouflage the human labor. What I was calling the dumbwaiter effect, that, the dumbwaiter, we think, it was there so Thomas Jefferson's enslaved servants wouldn't have to trudge up the stairs, but it was really there so Jefferson and his guests wouldn't have to see the enslaved person bringing it. It was just the last 10 feet it comes up with automagically, like from a Star Trek replicator. And it's like, no, the labor is still there. The magically concocted Amazon t-shirt that they say is made all by robots. Who's getting the parts for those robots? Who's picking the cotton for those t-shirts?
Right.
Who's bringing the shirt to you? It's all still labor. It's just even lower skilled, worser treated humans than before.
Yeah, there was that I was going to bring that up next, because that was so critical, I think. And what I thought when I read that was, you were talking about, for instance, delivery workers being hidden. So you don't see the people who bring the packages to your doorbell or doorstep. You just see the picture of the package on your doorstep texted to you. But then I thought, well, in the grand scheme of things, America had, or the quote so-called first world, all of the global poor are hidden from us. The people who grow the coffee, the people who grow the crops or pick things or build things in China. Like you mentioned, the toxic chemicals that people use to wipe off fingerprints off of phones, which was disturbing. So I was like, yeah, there's levels to this. There always seems to be one rung down that is hidden from the next level up. And that's something that's really profoundly disturbing to me about our world, and has been for a long time. And obviously the most extreme version of that, or not, there's always more extreme, but a very extreme version of that is human trafficking, or the number of people who are in prisons in this country, many of whom are doing slave labor, essentially. And that's just hidden and kept invisible. And that's one of the most disturbing things about this world that we're in currently.
Right. And then that's why, I go back to look at, the invention of the assembly line and the early factories, and how none of those were about making goods faster. It was about, removing human beings from the equation, because human beings are unpredictable. Human beings might demand more money. Human beings are going to develop skills. Then the human being is adding value to the chain rather than just, minutes of labor.
Yes.
And it screws everything up, So we everything, the industry was about that. Digital did not have to be about that. Digital could have reversed that. That's why I kept calling it, even in the early 90s, I was saying, no, this is not a revolution. It's a renaissance. We're not going to go back in a circle and repeat the same thing. It's a renaissance. It's a rebirth of old ideas in a new context. So we're going to retrieve all those great things from the Middle Ages and medieval times that got repressed in the Renaissance. For all the good that the Renaissance may have done, it was about individualism. It was about the perspective of the individual and centralization of control, central currency, chartered monopolies, colonization. I mean, it was great in that it allowed those European nations to expand, but it was really bad for indigenous people and people of color around the world. It's bad for nature, bad for women, bad for magic, bad for witchcraft. It was bad for herbs, bad for holism, bad for a whole lot of stuff that we can now, I thought, retrieve with digital, because digital was going to bring us back to the fingers, hands-on, value creation, people working together. We would, even McLuhan talked about this, that digital would retrieve the commons, which is what he was really into, and subsidiarity and small business and And it still can. It's just that what happened so far is industrialists doubled down on industrial capitalism and used digital technology to amplify it, speed it up, while distancing us even further from the human costs and externalities of everything we're doing. But it obviously reached its peak because now we've got global unrest and climate change and mass migration and the collapse of nation states or city states. We've got all the stuff that the tech bros, the leaders of this movement, now realize we can't make a car that goes fast enough to escape from our own exhaust. No matter how many batteries it has, there's still kids going into the ground to get the rare earth metals to make the batteries. The batteries have to go somewhere. The electricity still uses coal. It's like in the end, there's some basic laws of physics that you really just don't get away from. And I know there's people listening right now. They're like, yeah, but nuclear will do it. Or fusion will do it. It's like, yes, but in the end, we're just spending more energy senselessly to increase the acceleration, because it has to increase in order to maintain a central bank-based balance sheet, right? The only reason we need to grow and expand the economy and do more activity and work harder is because we have a banking system that was invented by monarchs in the 11th, 12th, and 13th century to preserve their domination over a rising middle class, right? Under very different circumstances.
I actually don't know too much about that. How do you
was, after the Crusades, which were nasty, we had opened up all these trade routes to Moorish places, to Arab places. And we brought back a lot of Arab innovations with us to Europe. And one of them was the bazaar, or what we call the marketplace. That's when we got the market, was after after the Crusades.
Wow.
And that was the market that would be just outside each city. And the peasants who would normally bring all their crop to the lords, to the vassals who brought it to the lords because they were delivering up, they started bringing their surplus to the marketplace and selling it to each other. So that was the first time you had, like, the guy who raises chickens trading with the person who grows the grain, trading with the people who make the fabric. And they developed these what they called market monies, and there were all different kinds. I mean, there was grain-based currency, and some of them were based in nothing. They could be a loaf of bread as a coin. But the idea was these coins were issued in the morning, like when you enter a poker game and you get chips at the beginning of the game. You might not even buy in with your chips. You just know what they're all worth then. At the end of the day, you settle up. So they would have poker chips that they would use to trade at the beginning of the day, and then they would all expire at the end of the day. So they had all these different kinds of money that were optimized for transaction and trade between people, and people got rich. The former peasants became what were known as the burghers or the bourgeois, right? They became the rising middle class. And as the middle class got wealthy, the aristocracy got relatively poor. The aristocracy were the old lords of feudalism who hadn't worked in a millennium, and they never created value. So they had to stop the rise of the middle class. So they came up with two main inventions that we now take for granted today. One was the chartered monopoly, or what we now call the corporation. Chartered monopoly said that, okay, there's all these people making and selling shoes. I'm going to give just one shoe license, so I'm going to give it to you, right? So Jason, you are now His Majesty's Royal Shoe Company. You
Awesome.
have a monopoly charter, giving you a piece of paper that says you are the only one who is allowed to sell shoes in my kingdom. So anyone else who's a shoemaker has to become your employee.
Well, to sell myself, I am a shoe-in for the role.
Oh, good. Oh, beautiful. That's okay. My people were shoe people. The Rittners and the Rushkoffs had a shoe store. We were shoe people.
That was a terrible pun, but
no, it was a beautiful pun. But no, you are a shoe-in. But it's a different shoe, actually, when they shoe something. But we'll talk about that later. It's an important distinction, linguistic distinction, different etymology. But it is interesting because you think of it as like kicking it with your little shoe into the golf ball, into the hole. But if you had the exclusive, and this is making the story a little bit longer, but if you have the exclusive charter to do it, now you don't want the skilled shoemakers working for you because they charge a lot of money. You want to go to the medieval equivalent of the Home Depot parking lot, get 10 undocumented aliens, and teach each one of them how to do one tiny portion of the shoe process. So you could train them in 15 minutes. If they act up, you get rid of them and bring in another one, right? So that's the moment we put the clock on the tower in the medieval village, because now instead of someone selling the value they created, they're selling human time. That was the first time we used time for wages, time for employment since indentured servitude, since like biblical stuff, since real slaves, right? So it was an odd shift. The other main shift was central currency. So instead of letting people use all these local monies that were optimized for transaction, free monies that you just use to trade, to keep track, like IOUs, now if you use one of those, we're going to send the Knights Templar, which is what Philip the Fair did, the famous Knights Templar, we're going to send them in and kill you, right? You're not allowed to use that. You've got to use coin of the realm with our god or our monarch on the coin. But the way you get that coin of the realm is you borrow it from the central treasury at interest. So in order for me to transact with you, I've got to borrow money from the bank at interest and eventually pay the bank back more than I borrowed. Where does the additional money come from? The economy has to grow. We got to go and colonize some other place and enslave their people and take their resources and grow the economy so that the wealthy can be paid, because the wealthy are still not working. They just have a monopoly on money granted by the king. They make money by having money, right? They make money by having a monopoly on money. That's the beginning of central banking. And it's where all the way down to today, when even Biden or any politician says, oh, we've got to create jobs, we've got to create jobs and grow the economy. And I always say, well, wait a minute. Do we really want jobs? Jobs are a relatively new invention, right? Jobs are a form of indentured servitude. Employment, the unemployment problem, there's not an unemployment problem. If AI and robots are going to do all the work, I'm more than happy to do all the play, right? The only employment problem should not be that it's the only justification for employment now is not that there's work that needs to be done. It's that you're not allowed to participate in the spoils of capitalism unless you have a job, right? And so you're going to get a job making a piece of plastic that nobody wants, that we're going to have to get advertisers to convince people to buy, that's going to make their lives bad. We're going to have to convince kids that they're not skinny enough, so they buy more of this crap that they don't really need to make themselves unhealthy just so that you can have a job. But that's crazy, right? So there's jobs and the chartered monopoly, which says that we're not allowed to create business, that these giant companies need to be kept alive because they are the exclusive purveyors. What you get, though, is even though companies are not born as monopolies today, in order to function, they need to become monopolies. So that's what Cory Doctorow writes a lot about. Amazon and Facebook and Google, they need to become monopolies in order to achieve success in the economy as it was structured by these dudes in the Renaissance, right? So the Renaissance is when that stuff happened. All this centralization, the creation of the mythology around the nation state. Nation states aren't real. We had city states that were these sort of natural amalgamations of people. The nation state was this artificial boundary. You're not Venetian. You're Italian, right? It's an artificial political boundary. So now, we live under that. And it's funny that it's in its last gasp, we get Brexit. We get Make America Great Again, because the mythologies need to be reinforced because people are waking up to the fact that these nation states aren't real. There's nothing about them. There's nothing. They're artificial political boundary structures. But those are both Renaissance era inventions. And a lot of us, or certainly I, thought that digital being as big as the printing press, right? That in the original Renaissance, we got printing press, we circumnavigated the globe, we got perspective painting, we got the invention of the individual, we got the central currency and corporatization. If we have another Renaissance, then all the things that were repressed in that original Renaissance could now be reborn. So we'll get women, paganism, the commons, and we see the same stuff. We see instead of Instead of perspective painting, we get the holograph or the fractal. We get, increased dimensionality. Instead of circumnavigating the globe, which they did then, we orbited the globe from space. So there's a lot of parallels to this moment, to the original Renaissance, but the things we're going to bring back are not doubling down on the stupid things we rebirthed in the original Renaissance, like colonization and effective altruism. We should rebirth the things that got repressed. And we see that in the culture that you and I talk about, the Genesis peorage and gender and women and paganism and magic of the good sort and culture and the commons. Those things, honestly, if they don't come back, we all die, right? It's Terence's thing about we're not necessarily a dying civilization, but we are in rebirth. If the baby isn't allowed to be delivered, if they really sew the vagina shut, which is what the tech bros want to do, prevent the baby from coming out and launch off the planet into space, we all die, right? Instead, we've got to, not to get Joni Mitchell on you, but just go back to the garden here. This is not rocket science. It's literally not rocket science. Elon Musk is rocket science. This is so much easier.
It's so, yeah. I feel that at its core, I'm just thinking of so many things as you're saying this. It's like at its best, at its core, and what was hoped for, and still can be hoped for, I think, is the idea that the technology can create new models that better structure society, in the sense that Buckminster Fuller, I think in the 70s said, nobody really needs to work anymore, truly. So, but instead of restructuring society in a way that makes sense, which I think a lot of people have that impulse, it just turns into, I love your phrase, moonshot boondoggles. That is hilarious. It's like, and the classic example is Elon Musk just coming up with stuff that he never delivers on, like the alleged robot that was just somebody in a spandex costume that he brought out.
Is that true? Was that what it was?
Yeah, it was just a person in spandex, and he said, the robot's going to kind of look like this, but it was just somebody interpretive dancing in spandex. Or it becomes a more sinisterly, it becomes a more effective way to do capitalism or to rip people off. And I think, unfortunately, the classic example is blockchain, which I was very, interested in at first. It's like, this is great. This is decentralized. It came out of Occupy. It's a way to get away from the banking system. But just like, .coms in a way, it just becomes a way to more effectively rip people off. It's like the thing that's being hidden by cryptography is not you, it's the people taking your money.
Yeah. My most optimistic take on crypto now is that the first thing you see in any new medium is the previous medium becomes the content of the new medium. That's what McLuhan talked about a lot. So it's like you get early television and it was stage plays, done on TV, like The Honeymooners or something. And then slowly but surely you start to see some other stuff, something more native to the medium. So the first thing we did on crypto was capitalism, right? Was tokens that you raise money on. And maybe, now that we've lived through that, we can then start making, and I know a lot of people, cool people who are trying to do other stuff. I don't know how much faith I have that it will work, but they've seen through capitalism and they are looking at creating some more sustainable possibilities.
That's my hope, and it always has been my hope, and that's why I was, talking it up like 5 years ago. But I will say there's a lot of. It's funny that I'm saying this, but but maybe not, because me being who I am, I have a very highly tuned antenna for delusional magical thinking.
Oh, good.
Right. And there's a lot of delusional magical thinking in the crypto world. Even people like Brock Pierce, the guy that did EOS, proclaiming himself a shaman. And, you get these people having just total delusional power fantasies that they're going to reinvent the entire world on the blockchain. And as long as it's on the blockchain, it will somehow magically work. And right now is a bit of a darker moment in that timeline, wherever that's going to go. The NFT thing didn't really go anywhere. And we'll see. The premise is somehow it will all work out in the end, but I don't know.
It's funny. The amazing thing about the crypto people is, well, not maybe the amazing thing, the limiting thing about the crypto people, many of them, is that they're looking to create a program that takes care of everything. In other words, all right, so we're going to do a crypto that embeds governance and prevents cheating and makes sure, that somehow they can account for everything with the blockchain and then let it go and run society. And what they don't get, just like the stochastics people didn't get, is that things are going to happen that you didn't program into it. Shit's going to happen. There's going to be drift of one kind or another. And what they would argue is, well, then when those moments happen, we're all going to get together and then everyone can vote on how to change the program to do the blah, blah, blah other thing.
Which has never worked before, but yeah.
Right. And that was, that's the joke of Ethereum, is that they say, oh, Ethereum is this, it's all fine, it's all this. It's like, yeah, except when enough people who are important in the Ethereum universe decide something, they fork the whole
right. Yeah, they just exercise central control on it.
Right. And, so it's like, okay, we're not going to use proof of work anymore because that's bad and uses up the planet. Instead, we're going to use something called proof of stake. Well, what's that? Well, it means the people who have the most coin decide on what happens with the coin because they have the most at stake. That's where we are now. The richest people make all the decisions on behalf of the rest of us that help the richest people.
Right.
So it's like, what did you just do? You just reified global corporate banking capitalism on a now even less accessible, a more obscure set of platforms.
The even more insidious thing about that, even with Ethereum, it's like, in order to stake something, you pretty much have to turn over control of it to a central authority, and you can't access it anymore. It's like basically putting it in a CD that you can't get at, and then if the thing gets hacked or the exchange goes down, like all these exchanges are going down right now, then all your money's gone. Everything that you staked to supposedly have control over the thing, you just lose. And that's happened to me several times, So
I know, and that's where they tell you, oh, well, you should have kept your own wallet. Yeah, well then I can keep gold bricks under my bed too.
You can't stake it if it's in your own wallet,
Right.
So yeah, exactly. So hopefully these things get. Hopefully these things get worked out. I mean, I do think that it is obviously a fascinating technology, but I do think that it's interesting that we're having this conversation the week of Silicon Valley Bank collapsing.
Right.
And I wonder what your thoughts are on that. And particularly reading this book, that, that was in the forefront of my mind, which is just like how many of these kind of like delusional TED Talk, I'm going to save the world ideas are just going to get taken out. And it's like that Warren Buffett thing. It's like, when the tide goes out, you see who's wearing a swimsuit.
Yeah. It's so funny because I got to do South by Southwest on last Saturday. So it was the day after Silicon Valley Bank crashed, but 2 days before Biden said he's going to bail it out. And I'm doing this talk called The End of the Billionaire Mindset, a Celebration. Right. So it was kind of perfect timing. And I didn't mean it as, what do they call it, Schadenfreude or something, where you laugh at the bad. But I originally meant it as like, this is the end of my book tour. And I'm going to basically declare that we have success between my book and other things that have gone on in the world. We've successfully exposed the billionaire mindset for what it is. And most people no longer want to emulate Elon Musk and Peter Thiel. They see it now as a sickness.
Hopefully no one ever wanted to emulate Peter Thiel, but yeah.
Oh, I think they did. I think they did. Or they certainly wanted the money or something. I don't know. They still saw that as the way out. And I think the billionaire mindset is fading. But Sam Bankman-Fried and effective altruism and all those things have been kind of revealed as, oh, these are fucked up children. Yeah, they left college when they're just freshmen. That's why they don't understand. They transferred parental authority onto VCs, and what do you think was going to happen to a little Mark Zuckerberg, poor little thing? He should be in the school for gifted and talented children, not at Sequoia or Peter Thiel's Capital Founders Fund or whatever it is that gave him his money. Poor thing. Because he's gifted. He's a gifted child. He's just not, Augustus Caesar, where he shouldn't be, right? But he wants to be. But the that TED Talk singular vision of, I've seen the light and this is the technology and this is the thing. That one I think is kind of over. I'm hoping that it's kind of over, and that this new crash, you want it to be as gentle as possible, but I've been through two others. I remember in 1999, I was the guy they called to write the New York Times op-ed on the AOL Time Warner merger. And I wrote in this piece, this is the beginning of the end. This means the dot-com boom is about to bust because Steve Case, the owner of AOL, is cashing in his chips to buy a real media company like Time Warner. The New York Times said, we can't publish this. This is crazy. Everyone in the business section says you are insane to say such a thing. Or this is the merger of old media and new and the beginning of the... It's like, all right. And of course I was right. And I spoke at South by in like 98, 99, right around then, saying, this is going to crash. And people laughed at me. And even Bruce Sterling, I think, said I was being nuts. We're a new paradigm and all. And yeah, we fucking crashed. Then I was back there in 2006 or 7 saying, there's people in Park Slope. That's my Park Slope story. There's people in Park Slope who, after I got mugged, were angry that I posted the block that it happened on because they were scared their property value was going to go down. And this was not because they were selling their property, but because in order to stay in their homes, they needed their property value to go up so they could refinance their mortgages at better valuations. That was the way that they stayed at home, right? Was earning off the increasing value. And that was doomed to fail. You can't depend on a commodity going up in order to stay in a house. And I announced that then. And then, of course, that happened. And now I'm at South by again, doing another keynote the day that the friggin' bank goes under. And I'm like, oh my God, here we go again. This is it again. But again, it's not time to be upset. It's time to celebrate. We have another window of opportunity to reclaim these technologies for human and interspecies flourishing rather than self-sovereignty and personal wealth. This is our moment. And so I think this is actually a good moment, and it's interesting that it's coming at the same time that AI ChatGPT-4 is coming out, and I'm so interested to see if people respond to it with the fear that poor little Tristan Harris is bringing to it with his new announcement now. It's not the social dilemma, it's the AI dilemma, and this is the greatest threat to humanity ever. Or can we see these as the glorified search engines they really are?
Right. I think that's well put. That's a much better way to look at it. It's interesting. Hopefully a maturing comes out of that. And it's interesting you kind of talk about, Mark Zuckerberg or people like this is, essentially not having enough emotional maturity or not having been properly parented almost. And it made me think earlier, we were talking about magical thinking and messianic thinking among tech people and comparing it to magic. And you said that part of that is the set and setting of capitalism and finance, and they get these dominator ideas. But I think one of the other things is that produces these kind of ludicrous ideas or, dominator ideas is just lack of experience. You get people who are taking psychedelics their first time, and you put in your book, 30 minutes later, they're outlining their plan for world domination or salvation. And it's just like, you just don't have enough experience. And one of the great things about magic as a, whatever it is, a metaphor, a life path, is you go through all these stages of trial and error and maturation. You get to go through the phase of like, I'm the great wizard and I have the power, and then you get knocked the hell down by the universe, and then you have the phase of like, well, maybe if I come and I act I'm altruistic and I try to help and save everyone. It's like, no, you get knocked down by the universe, and finally you kind of settle into just being yourself and hopefully providing something good for other people. And the people who just are just going into the psychedelics for the first time and thinking they have it, they don't have that experience. And they end up, the phrase I came up with as I was reading this is bong think at scale is kind of what is coming out of this. It's like they're having all these same ideas that I had just getting high in my dorm room in Santa Cruz. Like, hey man, like, wouldn't it be great if like all the world leaders could get together and do acid? on the blockchain. It's like, no, that's supposed to be an idea that you pass over. You're not supposed to throw money at that,
No, that's supposed to happen on the bunk, stained rug in your Santa Cruz or Reed College or wherever, what's it doing here? New Paltz, Bard. There's schools specifically for that even, and it's you pass through. It's a beautiful thing. I went through it myself. And then you get to the right section of the bookstore. Then you find your Leary and your Burroughs or ideally your Robert Anton Wilson, and you find out, okay, who's gone here before? What did they learn? Or your John Dee, for God's sake, or your Manly P. Hall, or your, Gurdjieff or Krishnamurti. I mean, it's like the thing I love about Krishnamurti, he's like, read anything.
Right. Yeah. No, I love that. No, totally. Yeah. No,
It's all good.
I always tell people, it's like, if you want to learn magic, the number one thing I advise is stay the hell away from occult books. Just like pay attention to your experience. And also, I think reading biographies of people who have been successful at life is really important. And you'll always find something mystic in there, oddly enough. But I think
reality had some natural occurring obstacles to initiation that really helped. So Charles Bukowski, this beat poet, was very influential on me. And the way I found Bukowski was there was a kid in high school who had a William Burroughs book. I think it was Naked Lunch maybe, or one of those, regular, popular. But at high school in the 70s, there wasn't that much of that. He has this book. I'm like, dude, what is that? It's got the word fuck in it. Oh my God. And it looks so cool. And he goes, oh, I got it at this store called St. Mark's Books down in Greenwich Village. It's not on the regular shelf. You got to go to the guy at the counter and he'll take you to this special shelf with like books that you're not supposed to see. And it's like, what do you mean that's what it's just, you'll trust me. So I go there and I go to the store and I go, dude, William Burroughs. And he's like, he gives me this smile, like the comic shop guy who knows when you say R. Crumb, and he's like, "Oh, okay, kid, come on," or one of those dudes. And he takes me back to this. It's almost like the pornographic section of the bookstore. Takes me there, and there's this shelf of all these like beat poets and things. And I find the Burroughs, and then next to Burroughs is Bukowski, and I'm like, "What's that?" And he's like, oh, check it out. It's this thing called Black Sparrow Press, and they have a bunch of these strange poets. You might want to. And I look at this and I get this book, and it's got like a short story about this guy who falls in love with this witch, and she shrinks him down to the size of a dildo and uses his whole body as a dildo.
Living the dream.
Yeah. And it's like, and I'm like, oh my God. And my little, 17-year-old brain is just blown by this stuff. And then I go back and then discover after Burroughs, and it's like, I go back to Burroughs and then Geisen, who's this Brian Geisen guy, and Cut Up and that. And then from Cut Up, they say that there's some music involved with this. And I go to Bleecker Bob and what's this stuff? And Geisen and Cut Up. And he goes, oh, you mean Throbbing Gristle, I think, right? And then you go to that and you get this. What is this? What is this? It's like there's an address and a thing. If you email it, and then Genesis sends you back a Xerox of Topi, and you're like, oh my God, what's that? So, but that's like 2 years of effort, right? And on each, so you listen to this record 300 times between the time that you get it and you get the next stage. Now, Tech Bro tells his assistant to go on Google, and everything is one level of depth away. There's no path anymore. It's so immediate. So there's no people. It's like now, it's like every magician I know of is sort of like Dr. Faustus or something. They're alone in their gorgeous fucking man cave VR paradise. Where's your coven? Where's your posse? Who are your compatriots? Who are you learning with? Who are you discussing this with? They're not. They're doing it, by themselves or with their, with their paid assistants and prostitutes. And it's like, no, I'm sorry. This is not, these are collective journeys, I think.
Interesting. Yeah.
I mean, there is a solo wizard thing. I guess some of magic does happen alone, like I imagine Mark Pesce alone, naked in his apartment, doing rituals to the winds or whatever. But I would want a puja, a group, a coven.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. I mean, I've done it both ways, and I've been a part of a lot of groups, and now I'm more solo. Although I say, like, I think the best working relationship is like one other person, whether that's like your partner, or a trusted friend. That's how John D. and Kelly were. That's how Burroughs and Geisen were. That's how Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard were, or Crowley and Neuberg. I think like two people is a good one. I mean, groups are great. I mean, groups have all their own problems, obviously.
Right. They turn into cults and this and that.
Yeah.
But I guess it's such a solo ego gratifying quest for power, that kind of Tony Robbins-esque self-actualized thing. And that's such a, not just a dangerous path, but it's a destructive path for those around you, So you look at, say, Trumpian magic. I'm sure you've done a bunch of podcasts on it.
I thought you were going to say, I'm sure you've done a bunch of Trumpian magic. I'm like, oh.
But the Trumpian magic is that, think and grow rich style magic as not just self-realization and actualization, but feeding or wealth building. And it's like it's sort of a shame it went that way. And I know there's a few people, Mitch Horowitz, one of them, is trying to sort of recover magic from the prosperity movement, which is, again, it's magic under capitalism, like anything under I guess that's finally my question to you. And then I'm still not sure of what is stronger, magic or capitalism,
Well, one thing to point out that I was thinking about when I was reading your book is the symbolic relation. I mean, Western, it's like with magic, you got to define, is it Western magic? I mean, that's something that's a product of the Renaissance, just like capitalism. And it comes from the Italian city-states at the same period of time. And one of the things that I was thinking about, but of course, that's not the same as herbs or witchcraft or women's magic or, tribal magic or indigenous or African. I mean, there's so many things out there, but
right. But you read your book, go read your book on John D, and you realize, oh, wait a minute, this is all fucking political. This is empire building. This is, it's like you start to see the Muskian, Peter Thielian, Trumpian qualities of it, that it's like, it's so tempting. If you're friends with the Queen, I mean, what else are you going to do, right? But then you look, it's like, okay, where's Prince Andrew and Harry and Meghan, and who are they talking to?
They're all Jeffrey Epstein.
Right. They're in that, either in the Epstein crowd with Andrew, or they're in the sort of meta-modern crowd, is where Harry and Meghan are going into sort of the sense-making. They know, that, and they're magicians of a sort, Schmachtenberg and the Conciliants and that, have overlaps with Tristan and Harry and Meghan, and they're all moving in, as Genesis would have told us. Of course, the royals are involved deeply in magic, whether they know it or not.
Yeah. Well, yeah, always disturbing, particularly the Jeffrey Epstein. What was that other guy's name? The children's presenter in England that died. What the hell was that guy's name? Do you know what I'm talking about? Like, he was like, turned out to be a necrophiliac procurer for the royals, and he was like the kids' TV presenter in England for 30 years. The hell was that guy's name?
I've got to look him up. But Epstein's interesting. So was Epstein, and you look at the plans for his temples in New Mexico and on his island.
Yeah, what the hell?
And it's like, was he a cultist or was he mock occultist? Was it occult design? Because he was basically a eugenicist, right? Supporting any scientist that argued that human beings are nothing more than their genes. So you can abuse them however you want, as long as you spread your own. That was why he got along with, Dawkins and Pinker and Dennett and one of those guys flying around in his airplane. They didn't realize how easily, I think their innocence on a certain level, they didn't realize how easily their staunch scientistic atheism dovetailed with this, very dark eugenics, eugenicist understanding of technology and human worth.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say in the book, it's kind of like you almost like take Epstein as it's like this is a model. Like this guy's modeling where all this goes. That was very disturbing for me.
Yeah.
And you kind of look at him and it's like, yeah, I've thought about this a lot. He's got like that crazy temple on his island and all that. And it's like, it's like I think there's just a certain level where it's just grim. It's just control in the sense of, it's set and setting. It's the sense you're putting people in an environment where you're telling them that you have power over them and you have control over them. And that is a form of, quote unquote magic, but it's all about psychological manipulation. It's not, I don't know.
Right.
It's literally just trying to, scare people or put them in, or it seems like with him putting people in a set and setting where there's kind of suspended reality so that they would do things that he could get on videotape to blackmail them with, particularly with substances and things like that.
Right. And it's the same thing that we do with technology, right? You get them into Web3 or onto a blockchain or into a metaverse or into virtual reality, or to get people to do things or search for things or look for things that compromise them that you can then use against them later, either specifically to out them from the left, to manipulate them from the right, or simply to model them from a digital perspective and, pace and lead as any good neurolinguistic programmer knows how to do.
Yeah, it occurred to me a while ago that it seems like the number one, if you're going to do threat modeling on the internet, the number one thing that makes people vulnerable on the internet is maintaining a fixed identity, which of course is what everyone does because they want to build a personal brand on Twitter. But it's like, if you have a fixed identity, you're targetable both by advertisers or canceling things like that. But you look at the effect on the world that anonymous people from 4chan had with no identity. And I think there's a magical lesson there. It's like your identity is actually the thing that makes you vulnerable rather than protects you from the world.
Yeah, that is interesting. Because it was on the original net. The whole point of it was, well, not the whole point, but one of the great points of it was that you could be anybody. I'm a dog. I'm a girl. I'm an obese Asian, transvestite today. I'm anything. And it was a play space, and there was really no genuinely negative consequences for living in various forms of drag. And I remember the moment that I saw, I actually met with them right before they did it when Citibank wanted to go online. Citibank was so immature in their understanding of what the internet was when they decided to go online, and there were so few of us who know about the internet in this like 89, 90, and it wasn't even the net. They called me in and asked if I was interested in the job of being the head of global internet for Citibank.
That sounds like a well-paid job.
Yeah, it was going to be like $400,000 or something like that, some crazy amount of money. And I remember talking to my mom, maybe it was $270,000. It was something just absurd. And in 1990s dollars, even more absurd. I remember my mom saying, well, you could just do it for 2 or 3 years and be a millionaire and then quit and do theater like you want. And I said, yeah, or I could do it for 2 or 3 years, then quit and walk out and get hit by a bus. It's like, I don't want to start, or I'll meet a woman, who likes me as that income, and then
yes,
she doesn't want
dangerous.
me anymore.
No, that's a good point. Yeah,
because I'll be that person. But the thing was, I remember when they were talking about it, and I did this meeting with them, and I said, "Don't go on the internet. That's crazy." I mean, at the time, because the internet for me was so anchored as this weird, magical play space of mutable identity, and I understood how the net worked, and I was saying to them, "Look, you realize every single computer on the net is saying, 'Hi, my name's Douglas. What's yours? Do you have something for me? I have something for you.'" It's like every computer is so promiscuous, saying, "Please come inside me, share with me, do something to me," right? It's like, that was what the net was. It's like, you're going to put a bank on there? We're going to have to lock down the net. We're going to have to make it serious. It's going to matter who we are. We're going to have to verify our identity. Everything's going to this is a bad trip. It's like, what do you want to do when you're tripping? Do you want to pretend you're a dog, or do you want to balance your checkbook? It's like, I don't want to balance my checkbook when I'm tripping. That's bad. Well, for most of us, bad trip, right? Bad trip. But that's what they basically wanted to do. And I saw the internet as an essentially psychedelic space. It felt like being on psychedelics, being out on the net. And honestly, it's still like being on psychedelics. And that's, another main point of this whole survival of the richest thing was the original set and setting of the internet was the unbridled potential of the human imagination, was creativity and chaos. And the Wired magazine digital investor sensibility is control, surveillance, paranoia, and extraction.
Yeah.
So if you're going to take psychedelics with paranoia, control, extraction, domination as your set and setting, what do you think you're going to get? Right. And here we are 40 years later. We've been living on an essentially psychedelic substrate for the last 40 years with a set and setting of paranoia and control. No wonder we're having a bad trip. No wonder we elect Donald Trump. No wonder we're freaked out. I mean, this is, just look around. This is bad trip. This is, I can't think of a more exact description for what certainly America is experiencing than bad trip.
Yeah, I'm sure you know the Crowley thing about Black Brotherhood, the Black Brothers.
No.
Oh, so the Black Brothers it's a crisis point in the magical trip. Where you get to the edge of the abyss, where you're supposed to surrender your identity and merge with the universe and become one with everything, but you refuse to. And then you basically become this vampiric, you're cut off from the universe. You become this like vampiric shut in. You create a castle. The image is, the Black Brothers dwelling in their lonely towers. And it's kind of similar to what you were just describing, or this book where you're just this totally paranoid, afraid, unable to let go, unable to enjoy existence because you're terrified of letting go of your individual ego. You don't want to do it.
Beautiful.
And on the other side of that is the whole universe, and you forget the whole universe is yours. You're part of it, but instead you want to like shut down and basically do what you're describing in this book.
That's the moment in Torah when, Moses keeps going to God, let my people go, let the people go. And Pharaoh keeps trying to hold on to them. And finally, God hardens Pharaoh's heart, right? And it's this weird line, and all these rabbis are always arguing, what do they mean? What do they mean? And, what they really mean, I think, is that God took away Pharaoh's free will. He hardened his heart. He turned Pharaoh basically into an AI. He became, one of your Black brothers because he couldn't let them go. Open up. You did it. You're there. You win. And he couldn't smash his own idols, couldn't get out of his own way.
And that's of course what produces bad trips too. You don't let go and you're clinging on and you have muscular tension and you won't relax into the trip. That's what,
Right. I know that's why Leary would always say, like if somebody says to you, oh no, I'm having a bad trip. Why? Oh, I'm turning into a robot. And Tim said he would just go, well, robot. Oh, so we're all robots, and
that's funny.
Act like a robot, and you just kind of go with it. And it's like, oh, this is fun. Let's dance the robot.
That's funny.
Right?
It's interesting you bring up Pharaoh too, because I was thinking one of the things I kept thinking about when you were, or when I was reading this book. There you go. Is how much some of these people sound like Egyptian pharaohs. Like Burroughs talked about this in the Western land. It's like you have these people who are so terrified of death. They're trying to live forever with all this magic of becoming mummies and things like that. And they're building these, although this may not be, archaeological valid anymore, but the story is they're building these pyramids to take everything with them into the Western lands, and they have all their slaves killed to go with them, and they have all their possessions, and they light their horses on fire or whatever, and all this stuff. And it's just like, no, just let go. Like, this is ridiculous. But it's hard not to see that in somebody like Jeff Bezos or some of these guys where they're and a lot of them are trying to overcome death, the human.
Well, they literally overcome.
Yeah, literally,
they mean it actually
yeah.
and consciously. Yeah. I mean, specifically and explicitly, right? They're going to upload, Sam Altman's going to upload his consciousness to a thing. Or Ray Kurzweil wants to beat death. Or they do it the other way with nutrients and, vampire blood and genetic re-engineering. And, they've got the Institute of Noetic Sciences on Gate Road next to where Whole Earth used to be, is about that. It's all life extension. And where'd they get that? They got that from the Russian cosmists at those great 2-track diplomacy meetings they did at Esalen in the 1970s. it was funny. They were set up originally because there's like, oh, Russia. It's like Reagan and Gorbachev were meeting about nuclear bombs and stuff, and those famous meetings. So Esalen set up the second track. They called it 2-track diplomacy at Esalen, the hot tubs in Big Sur, and they invited like the scientists and spiritualists of Russia to meet with the scientists and spiritualists of the U.S. So you had like John Lilly and the early Apple guys and investors, and Edgar Mitchell and Gene Houston or whoever, with the Russian cosmists who were like the Russian spiritualists and technologists. And it was the Russians who brought the idea of life extension technology to them. It was the Russians who were swimming with the dolphins originally.
Weren't they the early smart drug people also?
Yes.
Yeah.
And the early smart drug. But that's where Lilly got the idea to like start swimming with dolphins and do dolphin telepathy, was from those meetings. Yeah.
Wow.
And they were the ones who said, oh, we could upload human consciousness into a robot someday. And that was where those ideas then came to our tech bros as upload consciousness and life extension and all that.
That's so really funny when you say that, thinking of that, uploading your consciousness into a robot with like in the context of this like kind of like grim communist art, from that period.
Yeah, but it's the reason it was the cosmists and not our kind of Christians is because Russian Orthodoxy has a much more kind of literal understanding of when the soul leaves the body and goes up into the sky. It's like a whole different, what do they call that? Your
transubstantiation or something like that.
Yeah, that stuff. Yeah, they've got a different model of it than regular American Protestants. So it was interesting because their New Age movement, their New Age science-y movement, moved into a more literal understanding of life extension.
Where is that at now? Do you have a sense of that in Russia?
I don't know where it's at, and I'm sure it's probably gone because they went capitalist there. I don't know if there are many Russian cosmists left. There's a couple of books on cosmism, but they're pretty historical. I mean, I would say state-of-the-art cosmism is Sam Altman, is Ray Kurzweil. I think we caught the bug.
Well, it's interesting. We're talking about South by Southwest, and I was looking at it, and they have the psychedelics track this year, where there's all like the talks on psychedelics. And it's just like so bizarre to look at. It's like, I mean, I guess it's not a surprise at all because you have like the Tim Ferrisses and things like this. But it's like, what is going to come out of this?
They think of psychedelics as human engineering technologies, right? This specific molecule does that, and this one does that. And there's also South by Southwest is a business, and they want to include each of the things. So they add a track when there's something else going on. So
that shows there's so much demand for it, though.
Right, there is, but it's also the big patent area. Peter Thiel, he doesn't want people taking mushrooms. He wants to patent an analog molecule to psilocybin that then they can make money off of. That's depressing. That's the object of the game.
Yeah, it's like, I wonder what's going to come out of that. I mean, I read, I forget what the title of the article was, but there was an article, I think in the LA Times about a year ago, that was talking about the rebirth of psychedelics in Los Angeles, right after I left, of course. Great timing. But, and they were talking about like it's big business now, and there's all these rich people like going and like, Land Rovers to do psychedelics in on the West Side in Santa Monica and things like this. And they're interviewing this, quote unquote shaman. And he's saying like, yes, there are metrics for what we can do in this space. And I was just like, oh, Lord, why? Why has it come to this? It's just like, there's metrics for what we can achieve in while tripping in psychedelic space. Now that is truly blood curdling for me.
Yeah. And, for me, there's also, and maybe this is superstitious, but I always felt that a guy like Crowley, takes these journeys into ethereal realms, and by writing about what he sees, the way he sees it, he's not just mapping the terrain, but labeling it for us. So then when we go and see those things, we think of them like that. In other words, he's constructing the reality as much as he's just observing it. So when Terence McKenna says, oh, I saw the machine elves, he's created a metaphor for something that may or may not be fucking machine elves.
I've never seen the fucking machine elves. Are they real? I don't know.
Well, yeah, well, maybe. But there's something, right? But you label, so you like, and Crowley was also one of the last great English explorers, where you go to the mountaintops and you climb, and so he's moving through those realms and writing about what he sees, and as much defining them as mapping them. But when these guys, when tech bros then go out into these realms that they're finding, they're labeling them their ways, and that's the part that's weird. So I don't, because they're colonizing these spaces as they go to them, and they're labeling them in an effort to colonize them and then influence how we experience those things. So I don't like them creating the frame around these spaces and chemicals, and I don't like them being the loud ones. I'm still surprised that an Eric Schmidt can go do ayahuasca or something and come back and still just want to use AI to control the human population and work with U.S. government to disperse the billions of dollars on this shit. I mean, I'm amazed that these guys could have what I imagine are psychedelic experiences even more intense and better shamanized than my own, with higher paid shaman and better versions of the street drugs that I've used, and come back just as capitalist and governmenty and, whatever they are. But they do, they do. So I just think it's important that we create our own maps.
Yeah.
And in some ways don't let their, not like they can ingrain them, like with some morphogenetic, permanent, indelible, El Marco resonance that we can't change later.
Yeah,
but
I think that's a real thing, not even just linguistically, but like felt. Like I've had experiences doing acid where I'm like, this feels gross and strip mined now. It's like there's too many consciousnesses here. It's been colonized. And maybe I'm just imagining it, but I think it's a real thing. People leave their taint on that space.
They might, they really might. That's why I can understand why people want to use mushrooms or ayahuasca, because they have, greater histories and morphogenetic resonance of Aboriginal people using it, whereas acid is so new and frequently used by maybe assholes from the West that it's gotten that imprint, that acid has become a little bit more cocaine-like, if you will.
It feels, I barely ever do it, but when I do it, often feels very sleazy, like that kind of like cigarettes in a Las Vegas lobby type feeling.
Right. But not to undermine it though, because I personally, it's still my very favorite experiences were LSD experience. There's something, the thing for me, because I had an overbearing mother, and I was always worried about everybody else and other experiences and stuff, and other people's experience of whatever I'm going through in that moment. What do I owe? What's my obligation? That plant chemicals, plant medicines, I'm aware of that they have an agenda too. So it's like ayahuasca. Okay, we're destroying the planet. Yeah. The ecosystems are fun. Okay, mushrooms. All right, all right, the ground, the earth, the thing, the planet, the thing. Okay, yeah, women, and all right, yeah, I get it. So it's like maybe it's more like acid is like masturbation, and your mushrooms are more like an encounter with another being. But something about LSD was like it. And not like I can't have a bad trip or anything, but acid asks nothing of me other than look in the fucking mirror, look in this water, just be. And the plants seem to want to be like, yeah, Doug, but you need to look at this.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, even just marijuana is like that, but I think
it is.
Yeah,
marijuana
is
a mistress of a sort. I mean, at least for me as a cis male, whatever I am, I'll call it mistress because that's my obvious sexual partner thing. What I feel like I owe something to is the woman side. But yeah, marijuana is like this weird kind of perpetual girlfriend. And it's like, if I don't smoke if I forget to smoke for a year or something and you smoke again, she's like, where the fuck were you? Where the fuck were you, buddy? And you know what I mean? Or like you do too much and she's like, get out of here. Just
That's funny.
What are you bothering me? What are you bothering me for?
That's funny. Yeah, I have found acid. The interesting thing about acid, as opposed to plant drugs, is it is programmable. It just kind of seems for me to rip off it just kind of exposes the controls. And that for me is where the technology of magic with correspondences and things like that, it comes in, that really dovetails so well with that, because that's how you program it.
Right. But is there something you've taken and then seen beings?
A lot of things. Let me think.
You've seen beings without taking anything too.
So. Yeah. I mean, I've taken DMT. Somebody I met. Let me specify. Somebody I met. DMT. There's definitely entities. They've never appeared as machine elves to me. Mushrooms, particularly mushrooms with MAO inhibitors, which I highly recommend nobody do because I've never had a worse trip. But MDA is the one that I've actually seen beings in the room. And that was fucking weird because it was like, instead of a hallucination, it was like literally seeing something in the room with you.
Wow.
Yeah, that was weird. And that was actually during the Disinfo days. I got, there was this kid, I should have mentioned his name. He was an intern for Disinfo. They had this like bad street MDA. And yeah, so, but yeah, I mean, and I, usually it's more without drugs, it's more of a feeling of sensed presence rather than anything else. But, I've got tons of those experiences.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting how, I mean, I remember from that era, late 80s, early 90s, mid 90s, so much of tech, psychedelics, rave was about making contact. Where people really wanted to find the UFO or the interdimensional being or there was something, someone else. And now it feels this is more characterized by it looks more Bezos-like. It's the individual alone in their rocket ship, venturing out into
their very oddly shaped rocket ship.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not subtle at all.
Penis. Yeah.
One thing Jen said to me way back when was, in relation to that was, it's like all these people are taking DMT, like thinking they're seeing this other realm. It's like, but they never consider, well, they can see you also. And every time you make one of these little pinholes to the other side, it's another pinhole that they have to look back here.
Right.
Whoever they are, which was always the question with Jen. It's like, who is they? You keep saying they are doing this, that, and the other. Like, who do you mean?
I know. I always said by they, he meant like Prince Albert and the occult,
the Queen
family or something, the England royal family. Because he used to talk about them a lot, like having secret rituals under Buckingham Palace where they have hundreds of children.
Yeah, which turned out to be real. What's the guy's name? Oh, Jimmy Savile was the guy in England who was the kids presenter, but he was like wearing Crowleyan paraphernalia and occult stuff, and he was procuring, like, he was going out and killing kids with this other serial killer, and he was procuring for Prince Andrew and the rest of the royal family. And it's just,
English are weird. There's another scandal that they have covered, that scandal in the 80s about that it was the Buckingham Palace or the House of Lords did have an underage sex ring that was associated with them. And it's like, so, not that QAnon is right, but QAnon is right. I mean, you talk about QAnon in this book, and it's kind of like, that was kind of like a queasy section for me, not because of what you're talking about, but just because of reality, where it's like, okay, so now all of a sudden, all these, the realm of conspiracy theories is basically taken away from the cool people and is now, but distorted. And it's like, now you have people saying, well, they're drinking adrenochrome and like all this stuff. And it's like, this is obviously on the face of it, let's just call it hallucinatory and exaggerated, but it's not like Jeffrey Epstein didn't happen. But it's just like, but now to have this QAnon thing also, certainly I think serves people in power, because now, or Alex Jones, certainly,
it's like now, well, that's just like QAnon.
Goyim, it's certainly, as Grandma would say, it's not good for the Jews that it's friggin' Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, most of the people on the list aren't Jews, but it certainly doesn't help when you're basically getting an updated version of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. Rumor that was started by the Tsar, a Tsarist policeman in the 1800s. it doesn't help to see it, aspects of it be true. But the fact is, people do abuse kids. There are porn rings. It's like, that's all real. It doesn't mean it's, what QAnon would want to believe, a Zionist conspiracy of power. It's something, a lot more. In some ways it's worse.
Yeah. And that's the disturbing thing about human trafficking too. It could be right next door to you and you wouldn't know. And yeah, but then you have but it's like, but also it's like, in the English Crown, like Jimmy Savile, people like this. It's like this stuff is happening, and a lot of that was coming out, and it wasn't any one group of people, unless it's just people with power and money, and and then this the whole QAnon thing happened. And the other thing that became kind of queasy for me was, you address the Great Reset, and it's like, okay, well, this will be interesting because now that's becoming, that exists. That's real, but it's also become this kind of right-wing talking point, and this thing fixated on by, schizophrenic people, and but it is real. So I don't know what your take on that is.
It's real, but it's not what they think it is. So, in a sense, so you hear, the Great Reset, which is talked about by the head of the Davos, and you get folks, whether it's your sense makers, your kind of white male rebel wisdom crowd is kind of into this stuff, and some of the Game B people are into it. The idea that you can kind of reboot civilization according to the new principles of the blockchain and technology and everything we know about, systems theory, and get something better. But I mean, it's all ludicrous, right? It's kind of the SimCity understanding of how society works, that you just, use a better model and build it up from scratch. And the only people I know, other than the technologists, the only people who take it truly seriously are the conspiracy theorists, because it sounds like, a conspiracy theorist has been sitting around waiting for someone to say the world is actually controlled by blockchains, and we're going to build post-human entities that are going to make sure everybody behaves and plays nicely and does what they're supposed to do. So it fuels the worst of the worst paranoid fantasies. Yeah. If you take, that's really all conspiracy theory is, are people who take these tech bros at face value. That's what
that's
QAnon
interesting.
is.
That's interesting. Yeah, and it's such an obviously uncomfortable time, where all this stuff is like suddenly out in the open, running around, and it is dovetailing with the resurgence of the extreme right, and conspiracy theories are not cool anymore at all.
Right. And the collapse of all the things we were talking about before in a new renaissance, things like the collapse of the nation state and all, what's going to happen? It's going to push back. Right? Make America great again. No, we're not going anywhere. We're here. It's like, sorry, it's going away.
Do you have a sense of where that is at, and any thoughts on where you think that's going to go?
What, the MAGA movement and America and all?
Just that holding on, that resurgence of not whatever you want to call it, nationalism, the nation state, the far right. I don't know.
I mean, it's possible that we are not up to the challenge of this moment. And if we're not, then like Rome and other civilizations before us, this one will end. I think humans will go on in some form, but it's possible that this will end and people will look at highways and cars and TVs the way that the medieval Brits looked at the aqueducts and Roman architecture, saying, what weirds built this? Not even knowing how to, you cannot even able to reverse engineer that stuff. I'm hoping not. I'm hoping that we're getting enough little peeks and insights into how silly things are, that even if we're moving into states of increasing poverty, that will kind of force the left and the right, or what the artificially divided left and right, to see each other in their common interests and start working together. It's nothing like digging your neighbor's house out of a mudslide to make you realize that you and the volunteer fire department MAGA guys really believe all the same stuff. So I'm trying to be hopeful that the worse things get, the better humans get. that will get some kind of a Jode family truck. You remember all those those communist farms and Grapes of Wrath, and that we'll see platform cooperatives, and people are going to look at I used to love the guy like Jason Calacanis and Elon Musk and all these guys making these crazy quotes online about how markets work, and realize, oh my God, this is all just nuts. And go to this, and that's what I like about MAGA is there's a certain common sense in it.
That's quite a statement there.
Well, there is among those people. There's a certain that when it gets scaled is when it gets crazy, when they start to try to think about national governments and all that. But I understand the idea of of localism and empowering, distributed empowerment. A lot of that. I mean, take away some of the ideology off of MAGA and they sound like an occupier. There's a commonality there. And take some of the inability to forgive and reconcile from an extremist social justice warrior, and you get something closer to a MAGA person too.
No, for sure. I mean, the devil is in the proposed solution to the problem they've identified.
Yeah, the devil's always in the solution, which is why we shouldn't go towards solutions. Don't be a techno-solutionist. Don't keep your eyes on the prize and an ends justifies the means journey toward whatever you think is the thing. It's like, that's all my work now is about how do you engender an appropriate sensibility in the moment. And that's always about kind of denaturalizing power so people can distinguish between nature and social constructions. And you look at things like money and jobs and employment and go, oh, okay, these are all human constructions. These are social constructions that are not necessarily the rules of reality. You trigger agency so people realize that they're writing the codes by which we live. I mean, that's what magic really does, is trigger a sense of agency over the world. You re-socialize people so they realize we can do this together, that the other people are not your enemies, your success is not individual. And finally, most importantly, you cultivate awe. That's the thing that's been eliminated from our society, is a sense of awe, ecstatic group experience. When you have an experience of awe, you're more generous for hours or days later. You experience yourself as one with everything. Your immune system changes. Your cytokine response is regulated after an experience of awe. So in my work, what I'm trying to do is, rather than saying, oh, everybody, let's go toward this, I'm trying to engender the sensibilities and behaviors that make the world a bit less dependent on having a positive goal, a positive place that we're steering this ship, and more of we can all get along here, just fine the way we are.
You mentioned towards the end of the book, creating a counterculture to this mindset. And you use the phrase using circles and not arrows, and long-term thinking instead of escape velocity. And I thought that was great. And I was wondering if you wanted to elaborate on that more.
Yeah. I mean, let me stop it and start it again. I got another, getting echoes. We'll let it process and see. Let me see. Did yours go up?
Yeah, I just hit no thanks.
All right. I'm going to and you'll come back, and I'm here. Now I'm going to find that little switch again. It's weird that it did this. I wonder. It that's disable. I'm gonna disable it and then re-enable it. All right. Now it's gone again. Good. Start recording. All right, I'll remember all these. And then we should stop soon. I'm supposed to do a thing at 4 anyway.
Yep.
Circular. Just think of the easiest way in. I mean, what I'm trying to do is help move away from kind of this telos understanding of things. A lot of the tech bros are like into Desjardins and the Omega Point, and we're going to get there. Just over that next hill is the thing.
Heard that before. Yeah.
Right. rise from the chrysalis of matter as pure consciousness, get to game B, experience the fractal reality, and anybody who gets experienced enough with psychedelics or reads Be Here Now or anything says there's no door, there's no thing, there's no place to go. You're here. This is it. You want to be enlightened? Fine. You're enlightened. Done. IW enlightened. It's almost Wizard of Ozzy in that sense of just like, fine, it's done. It's even what est for all est and landmarks problems. That was the best thing about it, was saying, did you get it? You got it. Good. All right. Now can you move on with your life? It's that. It's realizing that it's in the moment. There's nowhere to go. So, progress has always been about, let's go west, let's escape from what we're doing, let's enslave these people and then move on. And you're trying to accelerate beyond where you just were, so the people you just fucked over can't catch up with you. And you move ahead, you escape the externalities of what you've done. You always need a new frontier, a new this. And then the digital was that new frontier, and it inspired a frontier mentality to the point where it got filled up. And then Mark Zuckerberg goes meta on that. He's like, oh no, this was it, but no, it's going to be up there. And the next thing, and we rise to the next one, the next one, the next one. And whenever you have that eyes on the prize mentality, you end up in an ends justifies the means journey, where you can fuck up people today. You can call the living people today, the 8 billion people today are the larva, because we're going to go through and get to chapter 3 where we get wings and sprout off the planet or become digital and move into the thing. And that dovetails perfectly with capitalism, which is always about you keep going, you keep growing, infinite growth. Always, it just keeps moving. You find a new terrain, a new market, and then grow and creatively destroy and go, go, go. And those of us in sort of regenerative economics talk about circular economics, which is about how do you recirculate value through a community rather than extracting value from a community. So instead of putting a Walmart there to get all the money out of a town and then moving on, how can you generate the exchange of value, the circularity of value exchange in a community? So it's more like a Dyson vacuum cleaner than a regular vacuum that sucks out. It's how do you optimized for the circulation of value through a town? And that's, obviously it's by buying locally. And I go to towns and talk to them about commerce. And I say, look, instead of earning $10 once, what if you earned $1 10 times? That it came around 10 times. You get the same 10, but it moved constantly. And that's simple behaviors I'm asking people to try. So it's like, you got to put a picture on the wall and you don't have a drill. What we do in America now is you go to Home Depot and buy a minimum viable product drill that you're going to plug in, charge up, use once, stick it in the garage or something, and it's going to break before you could use it again. You've sent kids into the mines to get the cobalt and the rare earth metals for this fucking thing. Then you send kids into the junk pile in Brazil to get the reusable parts off it. Everybody's getting toxified. What if you went to Bob's house and borrowed a fucking drill? Bob, can I borrow your drill? He gives you a big metal drill. Better yet, he's going to come over to your house and drill the hole for you because you were going to stick it right in the sheet wall. And he's like, no, you want to stick it in the stud. This is called a stud finder, Doug. And this is how you do it. And then why don't we do that? Because if we do that, then I'm going to owe something to Bob. What if Bob then's going to want to borrow my lawnmower or wants me to, probably he's got the tools, but he wants me to tutor his kid in calculus because he knows I'm nerdy Doug and I can supply him with that. What have I gotten myself into here? Where does it stop? And it's like, that's circularity. That's the circular community. That's the thing. And the circular is also, of course, the indigenous wisdom of understanding things come in cycles. Everything comes back. You don't earn enough money to retire and then it ends.
Yeah.
Right? Become part of the cycle of life. It's a very different approach, but only in America do we think you've got to earn enough money during your working years to keep yourself alive without any help when you're old.
Yeah.
What kind of world is that?
Yeah.
Right? That's the people.
Yeah. I did think it was super interesting that you used the example of local community economics with Black Americans as a concrete example. That was super interesting because now all of a sudden it's something concrete to think about.
Yeah, and they did it. Because the funny thing is I would do this talk about local economics and circular economics, and people would get up and say, well, that works. Sounds fine for like some white progressive place like Ithaca, but how would inner city people be able to ever understand something like that?
Yeah, that's a bit of a loaded phrase.
Yeah, and I'm like, you fucking asshole liberal, poser. It's like, look at your history. I mean, it was Black Americans who developed cooperativism. In the 1700s, saving up for each other's funerals, doing mutual aid. That's where we got the so-called Black Wall Street. That town near Tulsa, that Black area there, the reason why it did well, ironically, is because it was cut off from the economy. They wouldn't let the Blacks be part of the larger economy, so they had to build their own town. And they transacted with each other and circulated wealth, and they got as wealthy as those medieval towns. The medieval towns, using the local markets that I talked about, got so wealthy, they built cathedrals. That was their investment in the future. It wasn't the Pope writing a check for cathedrals in those small European towns. It was the wealth of the towns that was circulating, and a bit of de Medici accumulation as well,
right.
admittedly. But these were local attractions that were sponsored with local money. And the same thing happens when you allow that circular Dyson effect to happen, but it also happens for you emotionally and spiritually when you stop thinking of your life as a line that goes from your birth to your death, but as something much more circular and regenerative and continuous. And but again, to do that, you've got to let go. You got to let go, like you're saying, of that, of your line.
Yeah.
You
have to participate and lose,
surrender to the circle.
Yeah, and to participate, you have to let go of control, which maybe that's a good thing to end on. I know you have another thing to go on. So I would love to keep talking forever, but where can people find Survival of the Richest, the book, and more about you, and anything upcoming they should know about?
Well, Survival of the Richest you can find in any bookstore or library. If your library doesn't have it, ask them to order it. I still get a sale. You still get the book, and you don't have to pay. Libraries are cool, right? Remember libraries? Could you imagine us trying to start libraries today? We'd never be able to do it. I mean, what the fuck is this? You're going to hurt the books companies. They're great.
Yep.
They're free. You go, you get your book. It's a commons. Do that. Go to check me out at rushkoff.com, or I've got a podcast called Team Human that you can hear at teamhuman.fm or on any of those things, those podcasty things. And the other thing that your listeners would really be into is I did 2 graphic novels that are of particular interest. One was called Testament. And it was a comic. It's collected in 4 graphic novels that are really about it's an occult interpretation of Torah, of the Bible. And because the Bible is sex magic. That's what the Bible is. Sorry, Bible is sex magic. It's also sex magic.
Strong statement.
And to get that understanding is fun. And then this other one I did called Alistair and Adolf, which is about it's based on the factual occult war between Adolf Hitler and Aleister Crowley at the end of World War II, which is a lot of fun for occultists.
Excellent. Then hopefully people can get those at their local library instead of from Jeff Bezos. All right. Well, thank you again for sharing your time, Doug. It's always a privilege and an honor. And thank you again for being on.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Okay. Talk to you later. All right. Hope you really, really enjoyed that. I definitely had a lot of fun in that conversation. Meet us at magick.me, magick.me, my school for magic, meditation, and mysticism, where you can learn all the skills you need to unleash your true self. I will see you in class, and until next time, hang in there.